welcome to the Pandemic Perspectives Seminar, Autumn Seminar Series. A completely fascinating interdisciplinary session we've got today from the Play Observatory, children's experiences of play during COVID-19, methods, interim findings, and future plans, which I don't think sounds nearly as exciting as the project itself actually is. We've been chatting prior to this coming on. We've got a full gamut of disciplines across two universities. Sheffield is represented here and UCL. There are other collaborative partners, I gather. There's the V&A, the Great Ormond Street, and the British Library are also involved in this. And I always think it's strange when a presenter introduces your work, bearing in mind this is my first taste of your work and you're the expert. But a brief summary that probably doesn't do it justice is that during the pandemic, you've been inviting children, parents and carers to share stories, thoughts and ephemera connected to play. And you've been documenting indoor, outdoor, imaginary play, and including digital play from on-screen games and social media, which I think is completely fascinating. I've got all sorts of methodological questions that I'd like to get to grips with later on about how all that works. And I love as well the fact that you're very much beyond the academy, aren't you? The purpose of this is not merely a piece of research, it's also something you're going to take out there, and it lists on your thing a number of ways you're going to do that, with an online exhibition, public archive, radio documentary, and creating play wellbeing toolkits. I'm not sure, fantastic, very excited. I know that I could list the names of the people who are here. There's John Potter and Michelle Cannon, who are both from UCL. Yinka, I'm going to pronounce your surname wrong, Yinka Olusoga from Sheffield, Julia Bishop and Cath Bannister. Welcome. I shall shut up and leave it to you.
And Kate Cowan from UCL. And hello to other people on the call that we know. I can see Anne O'Connor, who I used to work with. Hi, Anne. Lovely to see you. Thanks for coming. And Wendy, we've been in touch recently, so I can see some people that we know. So that's lovely. So we've got a presentation to share with you. Okay, so we're going to walk you through the experiences that we've had since October 2020 as this team of people, incredible team of people that it's been an absolute pleasure and privilege to work with. And you're going to meet 5 of the 7 of us, 5 of the 8 of us this evening here. So I'm John Potter. I work at University College London Institute of Education, where I'm Professor of Media and Education. And you're going to hear this evening from Kate Cowan and from Cath Bannister and Yinka Olusoga and Michelle Cannon. I'll tell you what they're all going to be talking about. We won't be hearing from Julia. She's stuck in traffic in Sheffield doing a parental duty, and Valerio Signorelli is teaching, and Peeps is busy. He's guiding children through the play survey even as we speak. So this is our project. I'm going to introduce what it is, and Yinka Olusoga is going to talk to you about archives of play and how we began to think about designing the survey, which was really in the keeping of the Sheffield team, who did a fantastic job on that. And Cath Bannister, who's also worked on the survey, will be talking about outreach work with different kinds of community groups and youth organisations. And then Kate is going to show you some examples of the data from both our survey and the more detailed case studies that we've been doing. And Michelle is going to introduce films that have shown up in the data and in the workshop that she ran for children who wanted, and young people who wanted to do even more work with us on making films. And I'll finish up with a slide with some concluding thoughts, and then we'd really love to hear your questions and thoughts on our work. So, as David mentioned, the Play Observatory is a multidisciplinary project funded by the Economic and Social Research Council, ESRC, and it combines social sciences, arts and digital humanities. And what I mean by that is that it's intended to explore what is happening or what has happened during lockdown to children's play, at the same time as documenting it for future generations to try to get a perspective on it and to understand what happened. And we had a beautiful answer to a question earlier in an interview with a child about what was it like, and what would you like to hear? What would you like to tell future generations about? And he said, and he's 7, 8 years old, he said, it was really hard, but if you try, you can make the best of it, or words to that effect. It's the kind of quotation from a research subject that people years later will say that we made up, but we have the actual evidence of that. So that child will be in dialogue with future generations, because our project is intended to be synchronic, diachronic. And we have a long-standing interest in archives, which particularly Yinka will be talking about. So we want to put these fields and modes of inquiry in conversation with one another, find out what the benefits are of telling stories about our experiences, and knowing that they're going to be recorded for future generations is a really important part of our work. Most of all, though, our philosophy is to record and value play. Sometimes play in our society, in this country, is considered to be, by some, to be an ephemeral and kind of time-wasting activity. We think it's central to human existence, well-being, resilience, and to learning. And we are interested in, particularly in what children tell us about play. But to us, it's the centerpiece of human experience, of learning in particular. And we do not view the pandemic as being all about learning loss, whatever that might mean. Okay, so our project sits at a sort of season 3 of a series of seasons of play research, which began in 2009-11 with some attempts to record the archive of to digitize the audio archive of Peter and Iona Opie, that some of you might have heard of, who were archivists and play researchers who collected children's play from pretty much the end of World War II right up through the latter half of the 20th century. And they left behind a series of audio recordings and masses of paper recordings where children had written down rules of games that they played in playgrounds and play spaces and play streets all over the UK. So between 2009 and 2011, Professor Andrew Byrne from UCL, IOE, and Professor Jackie Marsh from Sheffield, was the first kind of teaming up of the two universities, set about digitizing that, and have left a fabulous resource at the British Library, which I urge you to go and take a look at. Fast forward a few years, and Jackie and Andrew put in a bid. This time I was involved as a co-investigator, and Kate and other members of the team, and that was called Playing the Archive, in which we attempted to start to digitize the written records from the OPs, but also to do some research into children's contemporary play worlds, and to try to marry the two things up and introduce the archive to contemporary children. So if we go into the third project, this one in 2020, we put in a proposal to explore what had been happening to some of these play worlds, in particular, this kind of outdoor social play during lockdown. And so we're in the tradition of those research projects. And we have several kinds of elements to this. We wanted to conduct a survey and to start to set up an archive so that the behind the scenes technology, which has been coordinated by Valerio Signorelli from the Centre for Advanced Spatial Analysis, working very closely with the Sheffield team, was to set up a survey of a contemporary phenomenon with one eye on how it could be archived in the future and how that archive could be accessed by the public. So we want to do that survey and archival work and set up an archive for future generations to look at and for people to be able to access, and Yinka's going to be talking about that aspect of it. We moved into, as the survey was taking place and people are uploading images and video and text and examples of children and young people's play during the pandemic times and just immediately afterwards, we invited them to be interviewed if they wanted to be, and to do a more in-depth kind of ethnographic style, joining them in their houses through Zoom. And Kate will be talking about both that and examples from the survey. We also wanted children to be, if they wanted to get involved in some film production about their experience of the pandemic. And we have some lovely examples of that, which we held a screening of just recently. And we're going to be showing them again in an online symposium in January 2022. So if you like what you see and hear this evening, then please do consider joining us for our end of project symposium, because sadly we're only funded to January 2022, unless, as I say in every talk, you know about some mysterious source of funding we can access, a mystery benefactor perhaps, a billionaire who isn't just interested in going into space with his mates, but actually like to keep the Play Observatory going for the next 10 years or more. We're also doing an online exhibition with the Victoria and Albert Museum, and some exciting young creative designers are helping us on that. And publications are ongoing, including, we hope to provide a toolkit for play and for talking about play in conjunction with Great Ormond Street Hospital and our friends there who are play leaders there. And some of our work will be in the British Library, as yet to be confirmed. At this point, I'm going to stop and hand over to Yinka, who's going to talk about and Yinka, just shout at me to move the slides on when you need me to.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Real. Okay. So yeah, as it's on the slide, the impulse that I had as a historian was very much mirrored with Cath and Julia, who are folklorists, and I think also with the rest of the team who'd worked on these previous projects. So we could see that the pandemic and children's play experiences were going to become part of family history and family law, but they're also part of a wider national history and global history that's being made as we live it. And for us, as John said, the husband and wife folklorist team of Iona and Peter Opie were an inspiration from the beginning, particularly as members of the team had worked on these previous projects involving the archival collection arising from their research in the mid-20th century. And what the Opies really had demonstrated was the importance of children's everyday play and how preoccupations with contemporary issues, including illness and contagion, make their way into children's play. So their collection, it's over 20,000 children contributed to their collection over a 30-year period. And they did most of that through a national survey. So we were used to dealing with the end product of their work, the end product of their survey. And that was a survey that was basically built from a network of adult, mostly teacher and child informants. And they had responses that were written texts mainly, but also drawings. And interestingly, the working on this project made us look at how methodologically they developed their approach over time, experimenting with how to phrase prompts to children that would elicit detailed responses about their play. So our work with their archive has given us insight, however, into the sorts of questions scholars have about the social and cultural context of play and about the identities of the contributors to qualitative surveys about play and children's folklore. And what we found is that these are questions that sometimes can't be answered in the Opie archive because of the gaps, particularly around the social and cultural backgrounds of the survey respondents. So we were anxious when thinking about designing our own survey to try to avoid some of those gaps if we could, and that informed our approach. So move on to the next slide, please, John. So our project brought together, it's an interdisciplinary team, and it brings together social sciences, but also digital humanities research. And we wanted, obviously, to investigate children's play experiences now, but we do so whilst anticipating the lens of history. So from that to start, as a multidisciplinary team, we were aware of the ethical and technological challenges that arise from our intent to centre the child as the contributor and to collect demographic details. So under GDPR, some of these types of data fall under the special category data. And therefore tensions arose from legislation around data protection, privacy and research ethics, and those impact on the questions we sought to ask, and also on the collection's intended preservation. And I think this is where, historical work sometimes is different from a lot of social science research, which is not necessarily thinking about long-term preservation of data. So academics have highlighted the unintended effects of legislation on scholarly research, particularly GDPR. And this has led, Boyd et al. 2018 argued, to the destruction of historical records due to misconceptions around data protection legislation. So we wanted to challenge that and to think about how we could allow ourselves to have a historical aspect and a long-term future for our data. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So I can't talk about every single aspect of the design of the survey. It took months to design, so I'm going to talk about a few important points. And the first one, quite rightly, is I think this idea about centering the child in the survey. So due to COVID restrictions, we planned our entire project as an online study, including the qualitative survey. But of course, contributing online makes centering the child difficult, as child contributors need adult support to sign up via an online platform. And this is why PEEPS came into being, the 8th member of our team. So this was happening during lockdown, and homeschooling meant that we actually had play specialists on site who we could consult, who were interested in the project and keen to help. So they co-designed the name, look and sound of PEEPS. So a 10-year-old named PEEPS and wrote the text describing PEEPS and PEEPS's role in the research team, and also helped to animate and voice PEEPS. And the name was a pun on Samuel Pepys, if you're interested. A 13-year-old designed the image of Pepys as a younger being. So on our website, when you look at the team, if you hover your mouse over our pictures, it flips and you see younger versions of ourselves. And so Pepys has that too. So we know Pepys is a child. The decision was made to avoid associating a gender label to Pepys on the website. But having PEEPS on the team page in that current and younger form, just like the rest of the team, signals this intention to research with children. And on the website, PEEPS acts as a visual marker of text that's addressed to young children and young people and children. And that is foregrounded, it's placed on the top of the page. So we're centering the child by foregrounding PEEPS and what PEEPS has to say. And the survey tool, which I'll introduce in the next slide, also allowed us to use PEEPS and to address the child contributor by name. So again, centering the child. So do you want to move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the survey design was led by the Sheffield team, but with amazing technical support from Valerio Signorelli and additional advice from the folklorist and librarian Steve Roud on the cataloguing aspect of the survey. We used REDCap, which stands for Research Electronic Data Capture. And this is a secure web application. It's really important, containing the data we want to collect. It's for building and managing online surveys and databases. However, it's originally developed for biomedical research. So we were ambitious, and we decided to centre the survey at child contributors, but also to include a pathway for adult contributors as well. So the survey is therefore divided into these child and adult pathways, each with its own consent, demographic and collecting instruments. So the demographic instruments focus on the identity and location of the contributor, and the collecting instruments are intended for gathering multimodal material through an upload system, such as audio, images, video, as well as links and text. So there's too much to kind of talk about. I could talk about the survey for hours, but I want to briefly mention two particular aspects of the study where we aim to be innovative in our approach, and they relate to identity and to emotions. I'll move to the next slide, thank you. So identity, as I've kind of mentioned already, is important to the project in relation to current and future uses of the data. So during the project, we would like to use it to inform us about the demographic reach of the project, to inform outreach work to target underrepresented groups, and to tell us more about the social and cultural context of the play. In the long term, we know from our work with the OP Archive that demographic and contextual data about the contributors will be as important as the data about the contributions. So as well as knowing what and when, historians are going to ask questions to do with who and how and why. So identity became a concept that we needed to tackle in practical, but also we felt ethical ways. Our thinking was informed by Peter Aspinall, 2012 paper, Answer Formats in British Census and Survey Ethnicity Questions. And the categories about identity in the census are routinely drawn upon and reproduced in other surveys in forms that we encounter, including academic research. And race, ethnicity and nationality are interconnected, but they're also problematic, charged, used interchangeably and imprecisely. And these categories often reflect a colonial history and present an incoherent mixture of categories that leave some people with no label and perhaps others with a label that they might find uncomfortable. And Aspinall explores the pros and cons of free text boxes for self-identification in place of or alongside tick boxes. And he argues that free text produces more meaningful constructions of identity, though he acknowledges the complexity that produces for processing the data. So we asked ourselves how meaningful the existing ethnicity questions are for children, and ethically, we wanted, as a principle, for the children to be able to claim their self-ascribed identities rather than having to fit into the often unsatisfactory official categories that we said that would render parts of their identity invisible. So all of the who questions about gender and background and disability in the survey offer the chance to prefer not to say or to not answer the question. We use the terms ancestry, ethnic or cultural background rather than race. And then we follow, and that's with an open text box, then we follow it with the broad ethnicity categories from the 2021 census, and they appear in alphabetical order. So what we wanted to do was to see what happened, and this was kind of a proof of concept. Would people engage with it? And so I've put on the slide there some of the self-descriptions received to date. And what's really interesting is that how I think some of those would not, you'd never know the detail of some of those identities if we hadn't given them that option. Should we move to the next slide, please? My final slide. So emotions. So the functionality of REDCap includes the ability to embed images, and we explored how this had been used by other researchers in some biomedical surveys. And our fourth research question was really focusing on understanding the role and value of play for well-being during times of crisis. And we felt that REDCap gave us an opportunity to explore the potential use of emoticons in prompting children to convey multimodally some of how they felt during or after their play. So we created a set of emojis to represent a range of possible emotions, including happiness, sadness, anger, worry, and just okay. We don't presume that how play feels, or that play is always fun, in inverted commas. And it's experimental. Valerio, in his 2020 book, Digital Social Research, discusses the limitations of use of emoticons in digital social research, but much of that is conducted with adults. So our experience of kind of working with young children in the early years suggested that emojis might have this potential to prompt a conversation between child contributors and adults that could be illuminating. They're also accessible for younger children who don't need an adult to type this as a response to them. We decided that the contributors asked if they want to use emojis before they're revealed, and we don't have a label that describes what the emoticon actually means. We've allowed contributors to select multiple emoticons rather than just choose one, hopefully reflecting that emotional states can be complex. And so far, child contributors who use emojis tend just to use one of them. And sometimes they've used it in conjunction with emotions text and sometimes without. So we've got an example here of a child who chose the okay face, but talked about drawing makes me happy and expanded on a bit. I like showing people my drawings. I send my photos to Nanny, Bampy, Granny and Grandpa. So the next challenge is going to be how to catalogue that, but I'm going to stop there and hand over.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about our methods in trying to sort of reach out to groups and schools. And this was something that really interested us because a lot of the early on in the pandemic, when there were local and national lockdowns, a lot of focus was on the home. And we were aware that schools were closed to many children, as were parks and play centres and special interest groups for children, such as youth clubs and sports groups and youth organisations like the Scouts. They had to suspend face-to-face meetings due to social distancing measures. But we also recognise that this is only part of the story, because for the children of key workers, schools remained open. And sometimes when we look back, we talk about schools were closed, but actually they weren't. They were operating differently due to having sort of smaller numbers of children from different ages and different classes there. And many clubs and groups we knew anecdotally from family experience in my case, and also from the press and groups themselves, made this leap to online meetings over platforms like Zoom, which became very popular. And they were adapting their activities to the new situation while maintaining this sense of continuity for children, as well as opportunities for socialisation and support and fun. So this raised some interesting questions for us as researchers about how children have been playing and socialising with these their peers in these settings, including online digital settings. We wanted to find out what the adults and the children themselves engaged in these activities and spaces had noticed about changes to their play. For example, had awareness of COVID-19 or the pandemic's accompanying restrictions informed the creation of new games or variants on games, had in schools mixing with different peers or children from different age groups, perhaps created new opportunities for different types of play or game transmission. And perhaps, like you can see on this slide, the barrier, maybe the introduction of physical items to support distancing, maybe they created affordances for play as well. And we also hope that engaging with schools and clubs would be another way for our survey to sort of reach as many children as possible, which was one of our commitments for the project, by inviting organisations to sort of contribute collectively as a class or a club. So if we can have the next slide, please. So this is just to give you a taste of what organisations have been doing. Our project website has been able to host a series of blogs written by team members, but we've also had a fantastic run of contributions from guest bloggers as well during the project. One of our guest bloggers, whose blog you can read in full on the website, is Raggy Desai, who is a cub arcaler or pack leader from South Yorkshire. And Raggy shared with us some of the activities that she ran for her cubs during the pandemic in her blog. She explained that she felt for the cubs who had missed out on their weekly meetings, and she also wanted to distract and entertain them with some badge work, which is a core element of the Scouting programme. And she used established Scout software to set this badge work. She says there they took part in artist, book reader and home help badges, and I think we can imagine that those would probably be badges that were quite straightforward to do in a situation where you were sort of restricted in your movement and you were in the home a lot. And she also says that she ran a Halloween fancy dress party over Zoom for the children, and the cubs and the leaders got dressed up and they played games and told jokes. So these personal experience stories like Raggy's offer a different perspective on the pandemic for children and the adults working alongside them. And it's interesting to set this against the narratives of loss and boredom that have been ascribed to children's situations, because they show real creativity and innovation and continuity in activities and social relationships and networks, and also the playful observance of seasonal custom, which as a folklorist I'm really interested in, and which we incorporated into our study as well under this very broad definition of play that we have, drawing on the work of Sutton Smith, but also harking back to the Opies themselves, who were folklorists and explored children's lore alongside their play and games. So we felt that trying to make a record of these collective experiences was also important. As John has previously mentioned, our team is also concerned with exploring children's well-being, as highlighted by Yinka with the use of emoticons in the survey. So next slide, please. So moving on to kind of our methods here to support schools, early years settings and youth groups and organisations to contribute to our project, we created sets of resources which are free and they're accessible to download from our Play Observatory website. So we compiled 3 sets of resources for different ages and stages within I suppose the school system or conventional education. So that covers early years, primary and secondary school settings. And then we created a 4th set for clubs and organisations. And they're all in PowerPoint form and free to download from a resources section positioned on our website. And the packs include differentiated suggested activities for the various ages and stages of the participants that we're hoping to reach. And they also inform children and teachers or group leaders of the kinds of contributions that we are looking for, hopefully communicating that contributions don't have to be complex. We're very keen to sort of get across that they can be something as simple as a joke, a vernacular term for coronavirus, as well as more rich descriptions of activities and play during the pandemic. So we are not kind of expecting everybody to contribute their life story. It can be something that to the contributor maybe seems so sort of frivolous, maybe that they don't feel it's worth contributing, but of course it is. And that's what we're sort of hoping to capture. And we also included suggested activities and provocations to draw out memories designed for groups and classes to encourage children to record their everyday play in their homes and school. And these included things like mapping play spaces, games, jokes, songs, rhymes or raps about the pandemic, things children have made at home or in school, rumour and belief about the pandemic, things children have done alone and with other people, even if those people were in different spaces, such as online interactions and trips away and celebrations. And Yinka has already mentioned how the OPs, with their sort of their prompts and provocations within their own survey, where they asked very sort of open-ended approach, which allowed for these sort of rich contributions. And I think that's what we were sort of inspired by and striving for with our own provocations, rather than asking sort of direct and specific narrow questions. Hopefully encouraging children to respond as little or as much as they would like, and in ways that they would feel most comfortable. And for older children and teenagers, one thing we suggested was maybe a diary task, recording a day in the life during the pandemic, and offered suggestions on how young people could make their entry, not only by writing, but perhaps making a video or an audio recording, because what we are collecting can come in like many different forms. So quite sort of multimodal in what we are collecting. And we also suggested how these activities could be integrated into regular lessons such as history or English or PSHE. And for groups which have structured programmes, we suggested how the activities might contribute to badges or awards. And we also included a flyer within the resource packs and a parental letter and consent form as well. So going to have the next slide. I'm just going to briefly talk about a couple of outreach events which we did. Alongside publicising our materials through the website and social media, we had some outreach events designed to encourage participation in the survey. So during the first week in November, our team hosted 2 events as part of the Festival of Social Science, the ESRC Festival of Social Science, one tailored for teachers, youth leaders, practitioners, and the other for families, children and the general public. And we, again, the events were differentiated and they were also interactive. We used Mentimeter software to engage participants in the event anonymously. And as part of the events, we shared a short film showing some sample contributions, which was hosted by Pete, who Yinka has introduced to us. So during the family session, we invited participants. We tried to develop innovative ways of helping people think about what they had been engaged in during the pandemic. So we invited participants to scroll through photographs that they may have had on a phone or other device, which is something that we found useful ourselves in reviving memories of play and family life and activities during the pandemic, and also to share examples of play they had participated in or observed. And we invited children who were present during the family event to create something during the session that they could use to inform us about their play, such as a drawing or painting a game that they had played. And adults were offered guidance on how to support their young people in making contributions. And during the teacher practitioner section, we introduced the resource packs for the different age and year groups. We discussed their content and offered advice on making collective contributions as well as obtaining consent and inviting questions. So next slide, please. So we were able to identify sort of through these events 2 different types of survey contribution that contributors can make, either by sort of sharing already existing memories and different kind of multimedia forms of documentation of activities and play which happened during the pandemic, and then from the resource packs, the responding to the provocations, creating a record of play during the pandemic. And so I'm going to move on to the final slide, which is just to give you an idea of participation. So far, we have 11 schools and organisations have registered with the survey. 4 adults in the organisations are teachers. We have 6 group leaders and 1 researcher. And we have different types of organisations. We have 5 schools, which they're very interesting, because we originally kind of envisaged a national survey, but it's very quickly become an international survey. So one of the schools is actually based in Brazil, and another of the schools is a SEN school in Harrogate. And we have also a Beaver Scout group has registered with us, a Children's Research Centre, a children's child-led magazine, and 2 have given us no information so far. And on the right of the slide, you can see, again, from this was from the Mentimeter from the ESRC event for practitioners and teachers, just some of the examples of the roles people hold when working with young people. So we've got quite a mixture there, from a primary and nursery to a music teacher, early years lecturer, and a student and play worker. So a lovely mix of contributors there. And I'm now going to hand over to Kate.
Thanks, Cath. So I've got the lovely privilege of being able to share some of the data with you. And we're still collecting it and we're still analysing it. So these are kind of initial impressions at the moment, sort of grouped around some loose themes. And as John said at the start, we are doing lots of work, especially the Sheffield team behind the scenes, to catalogue and make this collection accessible online. So these will be kind of available for more perusal at a later date. You could go on, John. So I think one of the first things that we wanted to highlight was that although children have spent periods in lockdown and experiencing restrictions in terms of where and when and with whom they could play, we found in the data that play didn't stop. Play did in some shapes and forms survive the pandemic. So some examples that we've got here relating to children playing outdoors, playing with family members, taking up new hobbies, playing video games, reading, engaging with crafts, puzzles, and so on. And actually even some families telling us that they had more time to play and to play things that they hadn't played together before. And I think we might speculate that play was sometimes therefore kind of an escapism or a distraction from the here and now, and that it then was part of actually supporting children's well-being and a sense of continuity when so much of the world around children was strange over the last year or so. You can move on to the next one, John. We then had several examples that we've collected that have been about referencing and responding to the contemporary context in their play, so the pandemic and the virus itself. So some examples here, we've got a 4-year-old who was playing cafe with their grandparent. They put out some plastic chairs and then the child rearranged them to make sure that they were 2 meters apart. And then in that same example, talking about how he dressed up, using washing up gloves and a visor and things like that, and talked about it being like PPE. Underneath that, we've got an example of a child that's made a representation of the virus themselves with some objects around the house. Top right, a child in Singapore who's made masks for their teddies and then arranged them in this sort of formation, talking about them going for their COVID vaccination. The one underneath that is a video clip of a child who's using a plastic screwdriver in the nose of a Frozen character, Sven, and counts as they turn it around, mimicking a COVID test. And then sort of examples like the one on the right of combining the sort of media references like Harry Potter and talking about making spells and potions to defeat corona. So the idea of cures there. And on this next slide, the drawing that you saw earlier in Yinka's slides, a 4-year-old who'd been drawing germs and hand sanitizer and sending these pictures to her grandparents. A child in the Netherlands who's made this representation out of Lego of a hospital. Bottom left, more masks made this time for Barbie dolls who are reenacting Joe Wick's home workouts that were really popular in the UK, especially during the first lockdown. Also sort of playing with rules, Donald Trump featuring in some of these examples, and Boris Johnson, and making rules for their toys. And another drawing here, sort of bottom right, of a child talking about the outside world having coronavirus, and quite an emotional drawing there about the small tree crying because they don't understand what's happening. So in these examples, if you just go back a sec, John, sorry. We've got examples of social distancing, PPE, cures, vaccination, sanitizer, hospitals, testing, and so on. So I think this really points to the children's understanding and awareness of the changes happening around them, and play as being a way that children respond to and make sense of the world around them. So changes in their social world being reflected in their play worlds. And I think we could say that play was perhaps a means of experimenting with this new normal in a kind of safely distanced way. So play gives a chance for control and agency, which maybe children didn't feel that they always had during this strange time. And it's also a form of multimodal communication beyond what can be easily expressed in language. Children are communicating their thoughts, their feelings, their awareness, and their understanding of the changes around them through these play examples. And if we can move on. We did also have examples of play kind of adapting and children finding ways to play despite restrictions and challenges. So sometimes by changing old games or devising new ones. So there's a couple of examples here related to playground games that would have traditionally involved touching, sort of TIG games, tag, chase games. Instead, there's an example of tagging with their elbows and actually calling the game COVID Tiggy, that you're catching COVID through this kind of contagion game. And then another example of children where they couldn't touch each other, playing instead a kind of game of tagging each other's shadows. Then we've also got examples of children finding sort of safe places to play. So an example of a family who was shielding for one of their children, talking about finding empty spaces in the woods to play. And an example at the bottom of child playing in a hotel during quarantine, finding a game that they could play in the shower. And then this example here of the little girl holding the stone. And I think we maybe saw things like this, the sort of the teddies in windows or painted stones in the park that had been arranged into a collection, kind of moments of play across time and space. So playing with other children in this asynchronous way, where you paint a pebble, you add it to make a COVID snake, is what they're calling them in this example, in your local park. So that kind of play with others, despite not being able to be physically co-present at the same time. And then we also had, if you go on to the next slide, John, many examples of digital play. This was obviously a real feature of many of our lives, and it's an intensification of an existing trend for children as well. We do see that children's lives often do include digital play. So this has been witnessed in examples like playing video games and playing online with distant friends and family, playing through video call systems like Zoom and Skype. So we heard about quizzes, board games, bingo, and so on carried out over Zoom. And also, what I think is particularly interesting, kind of new forms of what one maybe call hybrid play. So this boy on the bottom left here, who was playing with his doll's house in Germany at the same time as his grandparent in Scotland had a similar doll's house, and they were sort of talking to each other about what they could do with the figures. And then this top right example of parents in Denmark whose children were playing a game of hide and seek with their grandparent on the iPad. So the parent was hiding grandma and grandpa under the kitchen sink or in a drawer or under the bed, and the children would then go and find them. And if they couldn't find them, they would be asked to make a noise as a clue. So kind of the creation of new versions of games and the blending of kind of online and offline play and on-screen and off-screen play, I think, has been particularly interesting in the data. And as I kind of said, it's early days in the data analysis, but I think we can say that we're witnessing children's creativity and adaptability to devise and change games in response to constraints around them. and that play has continued despite difficulties, despite restrictions, in various ways, and that we see it as being important for well-being and as highlighting the power of play during these times of stress and uncertainty. If you could go on, John. So that was the survey data. We have been trying to build on this by adding a bit of detail and depth beyond the sort of snapshot observations that the survey's been able to gather that have been very wide-ranging, going in a bit more depth and detail with a selection of families. So we've carried out interviews with 11 children so far between the ages of 1 and 18, so a big range, and the interviews have looked quite different depending on those different age ranges. And this has been done fully online, which was an interesting shift for us, because in our previous projects we've been able to go into the playground, talk to children face to face, spend time, you know, in that setting with them. And we've had to sort of try to take some of the principles of our earlier research, so ethnography, multimodality, and participatory approaches in particular, and think about what they now look like, what that ethos, how that ethos can be continued in online research. And that's something we've just written a piece for SAGE Research Methods, special collection on doing research online, about that sort of shift in terms of our methods for the case studies. And there's a companion piece written by Yinka and Co for the survey. So in order to try and do that, to get that sort of depth and through an online case study, we've had these three elements to it, really. We've had online interviews. John was talking about one he'd been doing just today. We've also been inviting those children to create drawings and maps of their play experiences for us. So you can see one here on the top right, there's a child's home and the things that they've been doing mapped around it. And then also we've invited, some of the children have decided to take on filmmaking, which is what I'm going to hand over to Michelle to talk about.
As Kate said, I've got the total pleasure of being able to show you some of the moving image work that we've been receiving, which has been really impressive. And I mean, you know, we're talking about a 4-second clip, possibly, of a little makeshift marble run on the back of a door made out of tissue boxes and loo rolls, to much more polished, edited pieces and everything in between. So I'm going to show you, or talk about, really give you a feel for the young people who have been contributing, you know, what we know of their backstory, because some of them we have interviewed, most of them we've interviewed, 1 or 2 we may be going back to interview them because we haven't done it yet. But what you're looking at now, for example, is a young man called Louis Davis. And this was pretty early on in the process, actually. He sent us a very edited, polished piece of film work, which was built around a rap that he had made himself. And it's called COVID Gone. And it's just a really impressive, it's an impressive poem, really, as much as anything else. And I'm not going to show it to you. Because this is a teaser. You know, you'll have to come to the seminar to see it. We had to choose basically what of these movies we could show you, and it's honestly it's really outstanding. And it was a collaborative effort with his dad, I think, and it's tremendous. It's like a rap video, a kind of music video, and I just wanted to actually tell you some of the lyrics, just so as to give you a little bit of a flavor of how it goes, because it kind of reaches a crescendo. It's just him in his garden doing lots of things in and outside his house, and he over the top there's this voiceover that he has made up, and it's called COVID Gone. The whole thing lasts 2 minutes. I'm just going to give you a little flavor of how the rap goes. I'm certainly not going to rap it. So lockdown, shutdown, worse than Terminator, Corona, the new exterminator. It's not a rap, it's not a rhyme, it's just things happening over time. Locked in the house, the streets quiet as a mouse, every single person has disappeared, that's weird. My house is a squash and a squeeze, please, 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 that's weird. My mind is exploding, the plants keep growing, the sunlight is bright as bright, not as dark as night, the stars are all shining, the birds are crying, the sparrows are feeding, their tummies are screaming, everything has gone berserk. less people, less pollution, schools shut down, shops closed, high streets empty, worse than Terminator, Corona, the new exterminator. Okay, you get the picture. I'm almost sorry that I've had to say that, but again, it's a bit of a teaser to come along to the symposium and see it at the screening. So please do that. He also sends us another film in homage to his football team, the Rhinos, which is really lovely. And it's just a series of clips of him doing keepy uppies, you know, trying to do 20 in a row. Which I'm not going to tell you if he actually succeeds in doing that. Again, you're just going to have to come to the event at the end of January. So this was Louis, and I start with Louis because his was atypical. You know, a lot of the clips were much less sophisticated than this. So John, could you just move the slide on? Here were others that were actually quite sophisticated as well. This is our oldest movie making participant, Lauren, who's actually a media and TV student at Southampton. And she was given a brief along with her peers of exploring the notion of isolation, and had to give a kind of filmic response using whatever was at hand at home. And again, I'm not going to show you this, but it's something that was really beautifully put together in a style of a kind of 20 silent movie. And she got her twin sister to act in it. And she, you can see from the picture, she calls it Recipe for Happiness. And she took on different ways of representing, for example, you know, what's she put here, a pound of positivity somewhere or something like that, and put them all in a saucepan and started mixing it all up, and a few childhood memories got shoved in there as well. It's just really imaginative work. And she, you know, uploaded that off her own bat. Somehow she saw the Play Observatory on Twitter, and she's a tremendously I don't know, engaging young lady, and she helped us out further, actually, as I'll tell you about in a minute. Harry was another big contributor to our Play Observatory database. He gave us 3 pieces, one in a kind of, you know, documentary style, really nice tone about it, lots of considered shots about him learning to play guitar. We had a lot of children learning new things. And we've also had a kind of Hitchcockian country house thriller, which you can see a still from there. And that's he's standing in the doorway, and he seems to be developing a little bit of a trope of his own involving, you know, sinister presences and you know, things like, I don't know, The Thing and unsettling work, and he's very good at it. And this one on the left is a still taken from a film he took of a montage of lockdown moments, which went from him taking really interesting low angle shots of his Labrador and really interesting side angle shots of him chopping up vegetables and stirring onion in a pan, going for walks, on a swing. He had his camera on the swing, kind of going backwards and forwards like this, and that's the shot there. And then he pitched the camera up and would look at the sunlight and the trees and the wind. And, you know, all these things, they allow us into their world from their perspective, not only cognitively and culturally and aesthetically, but also from a visual point of view. And that's something that interests the multimodalists among us and the media makers, the ways in which the moving image enables young people to create stuff and make meaning in ways that are already very familiar to them and have been since they were babies, we would argue. And also that idea of kind of borrowing from popular culture and the importance of that. Not only in, you know, things like this kind of project to allow young people to express themselves in ways which are familiar, but also we like to promote the idea of allowing popular culture into the classroom as well. That's, as educators, this is something that we gun for. and are often ignored, but we'll still carry on doing it. Okay, so I would like to move on. John, please. Onto the filmmaking workshop. Now, yes, thanks. We invited some of our contributors, those who had ticked the box for, do you want to do more work with us? We invited some of the filmmakers to come on a specific online workshop to just create more texts, more films for us, but this time in a more solicited kind of way. The other material was more kind of organic, you know, what they were doing anyway, or perhaps they did do something especially for the Play Observatory, but this was very much a kind of guided intervention. We asked them to produce something which was around the theme of seriously playful play, which they enjoyed because they enjoyed that tension between the playfulness of what they were doing and then the seriousness of the situation outside. I'm not going to go into the plots and everything that these films represent, but just to say, for example, on top left, Prisha, she was 10, and she took the research call kind of on the phone in the car with her mum and thought nothing of it. It was all very normal and usual to be asked to present her filmic work to a group of researchers, and she couldn't have been more composed. And hers was a 2-minute film, edited to a certain extent, but it was silent, and it was just a series of her being filmed, doing the stuff, the normal stuff of every day, coming home from school, doing her work, doing her exercises in front of the telly, doing a little bit of colouring. As you can see here, she enjoyed meditating on her bed with Yoda, and it was just a lovely thing. And she was very articulate in the ways that she came up with those ideas, helped by her sister. Lauren here, this is Lauren's twin sister, Sophia, coming up with another fairly Hitchcockian style thriller, and the ways in which an actress was learning her lines, which is about being locked in as a maid, but then she started seeing correlations with her current life, and then there was this kind of blurring of truth and reality around that, which was really interesting. And the two on the right here, we're actually going to see. The bottom right one, Harry, you'll see he's totally developing an auteur style in the, you know, rather like, you know, the old 70s kind of style thrillers, which will chill you to the bone, I'm quite sure. Hugely accomplished with his photography kind of lackey dad, who was at great pains to say that he was just a lackey, being told where to stand and just hold the camera, no, right a bit, left a bit. And that was edited in Final Cut Pro by Harry. And top right here, this was in fact not, I have to say, in the filmmaking workshop, but it was screened in our filmmaking workshop. This one was uploaded really early on in the process of gathering all this data, and it took some time. Actually, it wasn't loaded. What happened was we were trying to get it from a very, very early stage in this process, and we've only just got it for various reasons of anonymity and all the rest of it. But it's just a brilliant 1-minute movie made by a 10-year-old featuring his toddler sister as a park cop. So I'm going to very much enjoy screening the two films on the right here for you. So John, should we go with Park Please first?
It's my back. No picture in a park. More exercise. No sitting in a park. No picking. More exercise. Keep running. No, you. You over there. You over there.
Apologies for the strange subtitles that you saw in that.
Okay, so no worries, John. That was a lovely little piece there of brotherly, sisterly love, I think, more than anything, and just a really playful collaboration between the family involving the lovely little girl. I think it's just I think it's a thing of beauty and a marvelous thing to just hear a toddler's voice in any film. We hardly ever hear that. So to hear it in a piece of research data is just really special. And it was just so funny and really well put together. So we love that. And can we go with the next one?
Yep.
Okay, this is a little bit different, but let's enjoy this. Thank you, John, for that. Creepy Manic Joe, who, I don't know, that was always a bit creepy, that card I found. But so great work there by Harry, who we are going to interview about that movie in another couple of weeks to find out more about that. But what we do know is that it was born out of his isolation in his bedroom for a number of days when he had COVID. I'm not suggesting that he made it during that time, although that's something to ask him actually, John. My impression was that he made it inspired by that boredom he had, you know, being on his own in his bedroom, not being able to play board games, with it speaking to his mum through a closed door and these kinds of experiences. So, you know, it's these very intimate moments, I think, that we have tried to tap and document. And I think this shows, again, that idea of being kind of playful amid the tension and drawing on popular culture and I don't know, we have got quite a diverse range of data as well, in fact, from 12-year-olds making Hitchcock movies to babies playing adult drums and things like this. So it's, you know, there's a real range. It's a fantastic range. So I'm going to show my final slide now, John, if you would. Just trying to kind of sum up why we are asking the children and people to do this. The slide on the right is just how the filmmaking workshop was set up in a Padlet, so that we could, you know, collaborate in real time on stuff that they were uploading and stuff that I had prepared, and that worked quite well. And I think what we've been trying to do is really, as my co-researchers have been trying to express all the way along, is that idea of children being co-participants and co-contributors to in the research process, but also in this global conversation that is happening right now, using mediated forms of popular culture, but also to celebrate them and their skills, and what I've called here their innovatory tactics for negotiating the daily challenges, from those tiny acts of creation to the more polished and imaginative work we saw. It gives them an opportunity to represent and screen their emotions and their cognitive understandings. And what does this do? I think on a serious level, it lends them an authorial and a curatorial stake in what will be hopefully the cultural memory of the pandemic that Yinka was talking about in terms of children's folklore. And we're offering this safe space to do it in as well, a safe and participatory, inclusive context. And we hope that their contributions will just lend a certain heft to what we're trying to do, and in performative ways. So I think on that basis, I will hand over to John.
So just have a few concluding thoughts, but I mean, there are so many, I guess, and I guess lots of people have got thoughts on the call as well. But we have collected evidence, as you've seen, of many forms of play: physical, play with objects, symbolic play, pretend play, games with rules. And in working with the Victoria and Albert Museum curator for Young V&A, we've also introduced a message hierarchy of constructing, imagining, exploring, and innovating. But these are all discursive elements. They're all up for discussion and up for debate, because we've been working at such a fast pace. The funding only ran for 15 months, so from October 2020 to the end of January next year. So we've had to really work at some pace, and we need to stop and reflect as well. So as Kate mentioned, we've begun to explore the nature of hybrid play and trying to go beyond simple binaries of good and bad screen use. We've collected the range of films that Michelle has just introduced. And we've also thought a little bit about the methodology of online interviewing, including on power relations in interviews and the potential of reducing interviewer hierarchies, because we're in the same screen space and we're all at the same size when we're doing our various Zoom interviews. But our overarching message is that play is alive and well. It's central to children's well-being and to their resilience in times of crisis or at any time. And that's really what we're about. And we hope you've enjoyed our presentation, and we're happy to take any questions from you about this. And those are the contact details. You can find the project website at play-observatory.com. Follow us on Twitter at Play Observatory, which has been Kate's great work during this project. And thank you for listening. And we look forward to any thoughts that you want to share about it.